Hey there, busy leader. Do you feel like your team is constantly in firefighting mode? Perhaps they're struggling to prioritize or lacking some sort of clarity. Well, welcome back. I'm Chloe Temple, and in today's episode, we're zooming out to look at the biggest problem teams are facing and what you can do as a leader to make sure that your team is set up for success. If your team is struggling under a heavy weight of a very never-ending to-do list, and you might worry that they're burning out, or perhaps they're not performing in the way that you'd like, you're not meeting your results, then firstly, you're not alone. This session will dive in and get under the skin of these dynamics and share a simple 3-step formula for you to use at your next team event to turn it around. So, should we get started? Before we zoom into me talking about offsites more, let's zoom out. What of this sounds familiar? Your team or maybe yourself, you're busy, stretched, tired, feel overworked. Your team or yourself, you're constantly firefighting and possibly so zoomed into the day-to-day do that you're possibly missing the bigger picture. Maybe some of your team lack clarity, they're not clear on what to focus on, and therefore they're struggling to prioritize. And because we're in that constant firefighting, everything feels urgent. And there's an inability to distinguish what is important from what is urgent. Perhaps collaboration is not as strong as you'd like. Perhaps there's challenges around trust within the team. And all of this is resulting in ineffective action, limited innovation, and poorer decision making. Result of all of this is a lot of busy work. I'm seeing so much busy work in teams, which is in some cases resulting in burnout, frustration, low engagement, low motivation, and poorer results than we would like. Does that sound familiar? So the biggest problem that I'm seeing, or I've observed in many teams, is reactivity. The reactive versus strategic. So if you were to look at this quadrant or this graph on this line of strategic to reactive, where would you say that your team were? Are they above the line or below the line? You can pop it in the chat if you dare to do so. Above or below that line? So what I see in many teams is this kind of non-stop crisis mode. We're highly reactive, performance is fairly low, and in some of the scale-up teams, high-growth teams that I work with, they're in this quadrant where they're busy, they're doing a hell of a lot, they're working really hard, really fast, but they're not necessarily being as strategic as they would like. There's some teams that are in this space, stuck in strategy, where the performance isn't necessarily coming through where they would like, but they are being more strategic, right? But the strategy isn't necessarily translating. And where I think we'd all like to be is in this top right box, which is high performance and strategic, where we as teams are achieving lasting success or sustainable success. So if you were going to reflect on this, where would you say your team are? 1, 2, 3, or 4? And whilst you're doing that, if you're putting ones in the chat, this is where I'm seeing a lot of organizations in. So you are not alone if you dare to put 1 in the chat. Yeah, brilliant. 1s, 2s, 3s. And sometimes the 3 is because we are being strategic, but we haven't necessarily got the right strategy or a strategy that's aligned between. So how do you help your team become more strategic? If you want to help the team shift above the line or even further above the line, if you're just slightly, as I've seen from many of you, just slightly above the line, how do you shift them into really above the line so that they can move into that top right-hand quadrant? Well, you can't do it whilst you're stuck in the weeds. And what I see from many teams is they're just stuck in that patterns of reactivity, the patterns of not being highly strategic. So the challenge for you as a leader is, how do you help your team become more strategic, prioritize better, and deliver more? And the solution that I have for you is by utilizing your team events, these moments in time when your team come together, unite, to shift them out of the weeds, to help them step out of the day-to-day and see the bigger picture. What could be true if you ran an offsite that really did that, that lifted your team out of the weeds, where they became really super clear and aligned on their goals, and where everyone felt motivated to go and make that happen? What would be true? What would that be worth? What would that be worth for you, for the team, for the business? How much better would the results be? How much, not only the financial impacts, but what's the emotional impacts? What's the other impacts that would happen? How different culturally would it be to be in a team that was really clearly aligned on what that looks like? How would you feel as a team? How would you be operating as a team? Energized. The results would be better. You'd be all on the same page, have the same goal. Yeah, exactly. More focused. This is where the less but better comes in. So many teams are just doing so much. You'd have more open to sharing ideas. Absolutely. So the leader of a strategic team knows how to do this. They know how to shift their team out of, or help their team or guide their team out of that reactivity and to be more strategic. And they know how to do so through things like strong team events. So I'm going to share right now the triple I formula for the ultimate offsite. But before I do, I want to just give a little bit of a highlight of how I came to understand, gather this formula, this methodology, this framework that has completely transformed the offsites I've been part of and those around. So the example that I would give, this is whilst I was still back in corporate, I went to a design thinking workshop. It was the first time that our teams had come together, or the leadership team had come together post-COVID. We hadn't seen each other for 12 months. And we did this. We had an external facilitator come in and organize this design thinking workshop. Has anyone done design thinking before, a design thinking workshop? Yes and no's. Okay, so it was a moment where we came into a room, we got into teams, and we got really into the depths of a particular challenge or opportunity for the organization, into the customer's shoes, and came up with an idea. We presented them back in kind of Dragon's Den style or Shark Tank style to the director at the end of the day. And it was such a great session. It was interactive, post-its on the wall, ideation happening in these little groups, such brilliant strategies that cross-functional teams came up with. And I was just wowed by the quality of so many of the ideas that had come up and were shared. And I left feeling super energized, as did many of us. And I went to the general manager maybe the next week and said, wow, that was great. I really enjoyed that session. What are we going to do? What are we going to do differently as a result of this? How are we going to utilize that? I just can't wait to see what happens with that. He turned around to me and said, actually, Chloe, that session, we're probably not going to do anything with it. And the intention of that session was just to get you all back together. The 50 leaders across the organization hadn't seen each other for 12 months, really to reconnect. And I left thinking, well, one, what a shame. We've come up with some really great ideas. I'm not sure anyone else would have in that session felt like there wasn't going to be something done with it. But secondly, actually, I didn't really get to speak to most. If the intention of the session from his perspective was for me to reconnect with a lot of the leadership team, well, I didn't, because I was in this silo group for the majority of the time. And we were so in the thinking of what it was that we didn't have that time to reconnect. So I'm now thinking, okay, right. Whilst I had thought that this was a really well facilitated session, and I was curious about facilitation at the time, asked him how much out curiosity was that? Who's like, oh, well, we were quoted $40,000 for that session, but what that facilitator to come in and do that session. What a waste of money for not being and doing something. If we probably utilized it, I think maybe it could have been worth that. But I left thinking, there's something that's just not hit here. And whilst it might have been an energizing session and I might have enjoyed myself, actually it didn't achieve the aims or the intentions And this is where I started to think, and it wasn't fully formed in this shape at this stage, but I realized that there's 3 components to a really great offsite. So I'm going to walk you through each of them, and I'm going to invite you to reflect on a specific offsite of your own or a collection of offsite, or essentially rate yourself or an experience that you've been on. You can choose how you'd like to rate yourself, but rate yourself in terms of these 3 components of the ultimate offsite. So it starts with the intention. So intention is about having a really clear purpose for the session. It came up in terms of what makes a great offsite, having clear objectives right at the start. What is the objective? What is the intent of this? You bringing your team together. What is that for you? And does everyone know that that's the intent? If I was to look at that design thinking workshop, if the intent was to produce some great ideas, then it would have rated highly. But because the intent was for us to reconnect as a leadership team, really it didn't actually meet that criteria. So how, for your offsites, how clearly are you setting out your intent for it? So Michael, if it is for your team to relax, amazing. There's a clear intent that you have around that. What is that for you, and how well do you feel like you go about setting that intention? The second component is interaction. And again, this came through in what you were describing as a great offsite. Has anyone been to an offsite or an experience where you've just been talked at the whole time as a participant? Yep. You're just like, oh God, another presentation. Really, all you're doing is waiting for the breaks or waiting for the drinks that happens after, which can be inclusive or cannot be inclusive in the current day. So how would you rate an experience you've been in? How would you rate yourself in terms of interaction? Was everyone's voice heard? Was there opportunity for you to tackle specific issues, to interact? Was there a facilitated dialogue that was created? How would you say that was for interaction, engagement, participation? And the final one is around implementation. And this is where most fall down, but really, really fall down, is actually like, are we going to do something afterwards? And that, again, if I think back to that design thinking workshop, this one completely flatlined there, because it's great to come up with ideas or to dive into challenges in an offsite and get your team in that space. But so often it falls down because no one does anything different, or there's not clear roles and responsibilities assigned to who is going to take action after this. How are we going to actually make this happen? Ideas are worthless. It's all about execution and action. So this final component is so often missed. What's the follow-on? How are you going to maintain the momentum that you've built up, or the energy and excitement that you've built up in the session? So rate yourself there. And I'm curious, which one, if you're comfortable sharing, which was your highest and lowest in the chat? And there we have it. The ultimate offsite covers all of these bases. It meets the 3 I's of the triple I formula. With such high levels of reactivity in teams as leaders, the challenge we face is how we can help our team shift to become more strategic, to replace the busy work with less but better. Which quadrant was your team in? Were you above the line or below the line? Reactive or strategic? Now, I know that with a well-planned offsite, helping your team shift into quadrant 4, that strategic high performance, is not only 100% possible, but, well, it is 100% possible. In this video, we shared the 3 steps to do so. In the next, we're going to share the 7 secrets for planning a super effective offsite. So stick around for that. And if you found this at all helpful, please do not stop now. Hit the subscribe button below. We have got more content coming your way to help you craft truly effective team events. Thanks for joining me in this episode. Hopefully you'll join us for what's next. But until then, here's to you creating the offsite advantage at your next team event.